In a quiet little town surrounded by lush green hills, life moved at its own gentle pace. People knew each other by name, kids played freely in the streets, and everyone felt like family. Among these families lived a curious 10-year-old boy who loved exploring the world around him. He was the kind of kid who could turn even the dullest day into an adventure, but one evening his usual energy took a sharp turn. It started just after dinner when the boy complained to his mom about a strange feeling in his ear. At first, she thought it might be nothing. Kids often imagined things or exaggerated small discomforts. But this time, something seemed different. His face was scrunched up in pain, and he kept pressing his palm against the side of his head as if trying to push away whatever was bothering him. "It feels weird, Mom," he said, wincing. Like there's something sharp inside my ear." His mother knelt down beside him, concern etched on her face. She gently tilted his head toward the light to take a closer look. From what she could see, his ear looked normal. No redness, no swelling, nothing out of the ordinary. Still, the way he squirmed every time she touched his ear made her realize that this wasn't just a passing ache. "Does it hurt more when you move your jaw?" she asked, testing to see if chewing or talking aggravated the pain. He nodded quickly, clutching his ear again. "Yeah, and it's getting worse." By now, the boy's father had joined them in the living room. Seeing his son's obvious distress, he suggested they call the doctor. "Better safe than sorry," he said firmly. The next morning, they took him to see Dr. Emily Carter, the town's most trusted pediatrician. Parents always felt reassured under her care because she had a calm and warm presence that put both children and adults at ease. As they walked into her clinic, the boy clung to his mother's hand, still cradling his ear. Dr. Carter greeted them with a smile, trying to lighten the mood. "So, what seems to be the trouble today?" she asked, leaning forward slightly to make eye contact with the boy. "My ear hurts really bad," he replied, his voice trembling a little. She nodded sympathetically and began examining him. First, she used an otoscope, a tool with a bright light to peer inside his ear canal. Normally, ear infections showed clear signs: redness, swelling, maybe some fluid buildup. But here, everything looked surprisingly normal. No inflammation, no discharge, just a faint shadow deep within the ear that didn't quite fit. Frowning slightly, Dr. Carter turned to the boy. "Have you put anything in your ear recently? Maybe a toy or a bead or something else?" At first he shook, his head vigorously. "No, I swear I didn't." But then, almost immediately, he hesitated. His eyes darted to the floor and his cheeks flushed pink. It was the telltale sign of guilt. "Well," he mumbled finally, unable to meet anyone's gaze. "Maybe. 2 weeks ago I did put something in there." Everyone froze for a moment. 2 weeks? Whatever it was, it had been sitting in his ear for days without anyone noticing. Dr. Carter exchanged a glance with the boy's parents, silently urging them to stay calm. "Can you tell me what it was?" she asked gently, keeping her tone non-judgmental so he wouldn't feel too embarrassed. The boy shifted uncomfortably in his seat before blurting out, "I found this tiny thing outside near the pond. It looked like a shiny bead, so I thought it'd be cool to stick it in my ear. I figured it would come out easy later, but it didn't." His confession hung heavy in the air. Everyone in the room understood how dangerous this could be. Objects stuck in ears weren't uncommon, especially among curious children, but leaving something inside for 2 whole weeks, that was alarming. Dr. Carter took a deep breath, masking her growing concern behind a reassuring smile. "Okay, don't worry," she told the boy softly. "We'll figure this out together. Let me take another look, all right?" As she leaned in again with her tools, her mind raced with possibilities. What exactly was lodged in his ear? Was it causing the pain directly, or had it led to an infection? One thing was certain: they needed answers, and fast. Little did they know, what they were about to discover would leave them all stunned. This is expanded into a detailed narrative with simple language and a natural flow. Would you like me to continue expanding the remaining parts in the same style? Part 2. A routine checkup turned strange. Dr. Carter adjusted her glasses and leaned closer to the boy, her focus sharp as she prepared to examine his ear again. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of medical equipment and the occasional rustle of papers. She knew how important it was to stay calm. Kids could sense fear or tension, and that would only make things worse. Her voice remained steady and reassuring as she spoke. "All right, let's take a closer look, okay?" she said, smiling at him. "You're doing great so far." The boy nodded nervously, gripping the edge of the examination table with both hands. His parents stood nearby, their faces a mix of worry and curiosity. They had no idea what Dr. Carter might find, but they trusted her completely. After all, she had seen countless cases like this before, or so they thought. Using her otoscope, Dr. Carter carefully peered into the boy's ear canal once more. At first glance, everything still seemed normal. There was no redness, no swelling, and no obvious signs of infection. But then deep inside she noticed something unusual. A faint shadow, almost like a tiny object blocking part of the view. It wasn't sitting flush against the walls of the ear. Instead, it appeared to be nestled further back near the eardrum. Her brow furrowed slightly as she adjusted the angle of the light. Whatever it was, it didn't reflect light the way a plastic bead or metal object would. Instead, it looked darker, almost organic. This wasn't adding up. Most objects kids shoved into their ears were shiny toys, coins, or small household items. None of those matched what she was seeing now. She murmured under her breath, pulling away briefly to jot down some notes. Then turning back to the boy, she asked gently, "Are you sure it was just one thing you put in your ear? Do you remember exactly what it looked like?" He hesitated, clearly trying to recall the moment from 2 weeks ago. "I think it was round," he said slowly. "Kinda shiny, but not too much, like maybe a pebble or something." "A pebble?" That didn't sit right with Dr. Carter. Pebbles weren't typically smooth enough to fit easily into an ear canal, let alone stay there unnoticed for days. Still, she kept her concerns to herself for now. Panicking the boy or his parents wouldn't help anyone. She decided to dig deeper. Not literally, of course, but by asking more questions. Sometimes kids forgot details because they didn't realize they were important. "Where did you find this pebble?" she asked, keeping her tone casual. "Near the pond," he replied. "There were lots of them scattered around. I picked the smallest one because it fit in my hand." Dr. Carter nodded thoughtfully. Ponds often attracted insects, frogs, and other critters. Could the boy have mistaken something else for a pebble? It was possible, especially since children rarely paid close attention to such things. "Well, we'll figure it out," she assured him, patting his shoulder lightly. "Let me grab a few more tools to get a better look, all right?" As she moved to retrieve a set of specialized instruments designed for ear examinations, her mind raced through possibilities. If the object wasn't a typical toy or coin, what else could it be? And why hadn't it caused immediate problems? Objects lodged in ears usually triggered pain, irritation, or even infections within hours, not weeks. When she returned, she used a magnifying tool attached to her otoscope to zoom in on the shadowy shape. What she saw next made her pause. For a brief second, she thought she saw movement, a slight shift, almost imperceptible. Her heart skipped a beat. Movement. Inside an ear? She blinked, wondering if her eyes were playing tricks on her. But when she looked again, the shadow shifted ever so slightly once more. This time there was no denying it. Whatever was in the boy's ear was alive. Dr. Carter felt a chill run down her spine. Years of medical training had taught her to stay composed, but this was unlike anything she'd encountered before. Live creatures finding their way into human ears wasn't unheard of. It happened occasionally in rural areas where bugs were common, but it was incredibly rare. And for something to survive for 2 weeks without being detected? That defied logic. She glanced at the boy, who was watching her expectantly. His innocence tugged at her heartstrings. How could she explain this to him and to his parents without scaring them unnecessarily? Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to smile. "Okay, I think I know what's going on here," she began cautiously. "But we need to do a little More investigating to be sure. Don't worry. It's nothing dangerous yet, but we'll need to act quickly to make sure it stays that way. The boy's mother frowned, clearly sensing that something was off. What is it? She asked, her voice tinged with anxiety. Is it serious? Dr. Carter hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. It's hard to say for certain right now, she admitted, but I suspect the object in his ear may not be what we initially thought. To confirm, I'll need to consult with a specialist who has the right equipment to handle delicate situations like this. The boy's father stepped forward, his expression grim. How soon can we see them? As soon as possible, Dr. Carter replied firmly. I'll call ahead and arrange an appointment. In the meantime, try to keep him calm and avoid touching the ear. We don't want to risk pushing the object deeper. With that, she ushered the family out of her office, promising to follow up shortly. As soon as the door closed behind them, she picked up the phone and dialed the number of a nearby ENT specialist. Her hands trembled slightly as she explained the situation, emphasizing the urgency of the case. By the end of the call, arrangements had been made for the boy to visit the specialist later that afternoon. Dr. Carter exhaled deeply, leaning back in her chair for a moment. She had dealt with many strange cases over the years, but this one stood out. Not only was it medically fascinating, but it also highlighted the unpredictable nature of life itself. For the boy and his family, however, this was far from fascinating. It was terrifying. All they wanted was relief for their son, answers to their questions, and reassurance that everything would be okay. Little did they know, the journey to uncover the truth was only just beginning. This is expanded into a detailed narrative with simple language and a natural flow. Would you like me to continue expanding the remaining parts in the same style? The drive to the ENT specialist's office was quiet, filled with a mix of tension and unanswered questions. The boy sat in the back seat, his head resting against the window as he watched the trees blur past. He didn't say much, just stared, outside, occasionally rubbing his ear when he thought no one was looking. His parents exchanged worried glances in the front seat but stayed silent, unsure of what to say. They didn't want to scare him further, but they also couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something strange was going on. When they arrived at the clinic, the receptionist greeted them warmly, though her smile faltered slightly when she noticed how anxious the family seemed. She quickly ushered them into a private room where the ENT specialist, an older man with kind eyes and a reassuring demeanor, was waiting for them. Dr. Carter had already called ahead, so he knew the basics of the situation. Still, he wanted to hear it directly from the boy. "All right, champ," the specialist said, pulling up a stool and sitting down at eye level with the child. "Tell me everything you remember about your ear. When did it start hurting and what happened before that?" The boy hesitated, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. Talking about it made him feel silly now, especially since it had been 2 weeks since he'd done anything unusual. But the pain in his ear reminded him that this wasn't just some forgotten prank, it was real and it mattered. I put something in my ear," he admitted quietly, avoiding eye contact. "It was near the pond by our house. There were these little round things on the ground like shiny stones or beads. I thought it would be fun to stick one in my ear." His parents exchanged another glance, torn between frustration and relief. Frustration because their son had done something risky, and relief because at least they finally understood why he'd been complaining of pain. The specialist nodded patiently, jotting notes onto his clipboard. "And do you remember exactly what it looked like?" he asked, leaning forward slightly to encourage the boy to elaborate. The boy shrugged. "It was small and round, kind of brownish. It felt smooth, like a pebble, but lighter. I thought it would come out easy if I tilted my head or shook it." The specialist raised an eyebrow. A smooth, round object, that could mean many things, a bead, a seed, maybe even a piece of gravel. But none of those explained the faint movement Dr. Carter had noticed during her examination. Something wasn't adding up. "Did you see any bugs around the pond?" the specialist asked casually, keeping his tone light so the boy wouldn't feel interrogated. The boy's face lit up a little. "Yeah, there were tons of them, little black beetles crawling everywhere, and dragonflies too. They kept buzzing over the water. This new detail caught everyone's attention. Bugs near the pond? Could the boy have accidentally picked up something alive instead of a harmless stone? The thought sent a shiver through the room, though no one voiced it aloud. The specialist decided to press further. Do you think maybe one of those bugs, or part of one, could have gotten mixed in with the rocks you were playing with? The boy frowned, clearly trying to recall the moment. I don't know, he said slowly. I didn't really look that closely. I just grabbed the first thing I saw. That was enough for the specialist. While it was still unclear what exactly was lodged in the boy's ear, the possibility of it being a living creature grew stronger. He turned to the parents, explaining gently, "We need to confirm what we're dealing with here. It's possible that what your son mistook for a pebble is actually something else entirely. To find out, we'll need to use specialized tools to get a closer look." The boy's mother gasped softly, covering her mouth with her hand. You mean it could be alive?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The specialist nodded solemnly. "It's unlikely, but not impossible. Bugs can sometimes crawl into tight spaces, especially if they're attracted to warmth or moisture. If that's the case, we'll need to act fast to remove it safely." Hearing this, the boy's eyes widened in panic. "A bug? In my ear? Is it eating me?" he exclaimed, his voice rising with fear. No, it's okay," the specialist assured him quickly, placing a calming hand on his shoulder. "If there is a bug, it's probably stuck and not doing anything harmful. We'll take care of it right away, I promise." Despite his words, the boy looked unconvinced. He clutched his ear again, tears welling up in his eyes. His father knelt beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "Hey, buddy, listen to me," he said firmly but kindly. "We're going to fix this. You're brave, and we're right here with you every step of the way. Okay?" After a few moments, the boy sniffled and nodded, though his grip on his ear remained tight. The specialist gave him a moment to compose himself before continuing. "All right, let's get started," he said, rolling over a machine equipped with a high-powered microscope and tiny surgical tools. "This might feel a bit weird, but I promise. It won't hurt, just try to stay still, okay?" The boy gulped nervously but managed a weak nod. His parents stood nearby, holding each other's hands for support. Everyone in the room braced themselves for what was coming next. As the specialist positioned the microscope and peered into the boy's ear canal, he immediately spotted the shadowy shape Dr. Carter had described earlier. It was indeed deeper than expected, nestled close to the eardrum. But unlike a typical foreign object, this one had a peculiar texture, almost segmented, like the shell of an insect. And then as he adjusted the light, he saw it again. A faint twitch, barely noticeable but undeniably there. His jaw tightened as he processed what he was seeing. This wasn't just a random object. It was alive. Somehow, incredibly, a tiny creature had survived inside the boy's ear for 2 whole weeks. How it had managed to stay hidden for so long was beyond comprehension. But one thing was certain. They needed to remove it carefully and immediately. Turning to the boy's parents, he spoke in a low, steady voice. "I believe we're dealing with a live organism here," he explained. "It appears to be some type of larva or insect, likely drawn to the warmth and humidity of the ear canal. Don't worry. We'll extract it safely, but we'll need to sedate him first to minimize movement." The boy's mother covered her mouth again, tears streaming down her face. Her husband pulled her into a hug, his own expression grim but resolute. They both trusted the doctor, but hearing the details out loud made the reality sink in harder than ever. For the boy, however, the news hit differently. Despite his fear, a spark of curiosity flickered in his eyes. "A larva?" he repeated, tilting his head slightly. "Like a baby bug?" "Yes, exactly," the specialist confirmed, smiling faintly at the unexpected question. "But we're going to make sure it doesn't grow any bigger, all right?" The boy nodded, gripping his father's hand tightly. Though he was scared, he seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation, and that helped him stay calm. With preparations underway for the procedure, the specialist took a moment to reassure the family once more. "This is rare, but not unheard of," he said. We'll handle it carefully and your son will be fine. Just focus on staying strong for him." As they waited for the sedation process to begin, the boy leaned into his mother's embrace, whispering, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." She kissed the top of his head, her voice soft but firm. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just promise me you'll never do something like this again." He nodded, his promise sincere. Little did he know this experience would leave a lasting impression, not just on him, but on everyone involved. Would you like me to continue expanding the remaining parts in the same style? The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and the occasional rustle of medical tools. Everyone in the family had their eyes fixed on the specialist as he prepared for the delicate procedure. The boy, now sedated, lay still on the examination table, his breathing slow and steady. His parents stood nearby, holding each other's hands tightly, trying to stay strong despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside them. The specialist adjusted the overhead light, positioning it directly over the boy's head. He then rolled the microscope closer, ensuring every detail of the ear canal was visible under magnification. This wasn't just about removing an object anymore. It was about safely extracting a living creature without causing harm to the boy or damaging his sensitive inner ear structures. "All right," the specialist said softly, more to himself than anyone else. "Let's see what we're dealing with." He carefully inserted a thin, flexible probe into the boy's ear canal, using the microscope to guide his movements. Every step required precision. One wrong move could push the creature deeper, injure the eardrum, or even cause permanent damage. Sweat trickled down his forehead, but he remained focused, his years of training kicking in. As he peered through the lens, the shadowy shape came into sharper focus. It wasn't smooth like a bead or hard like a rock. Instead, it had a segmented body, almost like the shell of an insect larva. And then, just as Dr. Carter had described earlier, he saw it. A faint twitch. The tiny creature shifted slightly, confirming beyond doubt that it was alive. The specialist paused, exhaling deeply. This was unlike anything he'd encountered before. While foreign objects in ears were common enough in children, finding a live insect, or worse, a larva, was extraordinarily rare. How had it survived for so long? Had it been feeding on something inside the ear? These questions raced through his mind, but he pushed them aside. Right now, his priority was getting it out safely. Turning to the boy's parents, who were watching anxiously from the corner, he spoke in a calm yet serious tone. "I can confirm that there's a live organism in his ear," he explained. "It appears to be some type of beetle larva, likely drawn to the warmth and humidity of the ear canal. Don't worry, we'll remove it carefully, but I need you both to stay calm and trust me." The boy's mother nodded weakly, tears streaming silently down her face. Her husband wrapped an arm around her shoulders, offering silent support. They trusted the doctor, but hearing the words aloud made the situation feel even more surreal. For the specialist, the challenge was twofold. Not only did he have to extract the larva safely, but he also had to ensure the boy felt no pain during the process. Sedation helped with the latter, but the extraction itself demanded extreme caution. Beetle larvae weren't known for being aggressive, but they could cling stubbornly to surfaces, making removal tricky. Using specialized tweezers designed for microsurgery, the specialist began the painstaking task of gently coaxing the larva out of the ear canal. Each movement was deliberate, measured, and precise. He worked slowly, ensuring not to apply too much pressure that might crush the creature or irritate the surrounding tissue. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Minutes ticked by, though it felt like hours. The tension in the room was palpable, broken only by the sound of the specialist's steady breathing and the occasional adjustment of his instruments. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he managed to grasp the larva firmly but gently with the tweezers. "Got it," he murmured, his voice tinged with relief. Carefully, he began to pull it out, inch by inch. The larva wriggled slightly. As it emerged, its tiny legs moving feebly against the cold air. Despite its size, it was barely larger than a grain of rice. The sight of it sent a shiver through the room. When the larva was finally free, the specialist placed it into a small container for further examination. Turning to the boy's parents, he gave them a reassuring smile. "It's out," he said simply. "Your son is going to be fine." The boy's father exhaled sharply, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His wife buried her face in his shoulder, sobbing quietly with relief. For the first time since they'd entered the clinic, they allowed themselves to believe that everything would be okay. But the specialist wasn't finished yet. Now that the immediate threat was gone, he needed to assess any potential damage the larva might have caused. Using the microscope again, he examined the boy's ear canal closely. Thankfully, the eardrum appeared intact, and there were no signs of infection or injury, at least not yet. Still, he prescribed a course of antibiotics as a precaution, just to make sure nothing developed later. As the boy began to stir from the effects of the sedation, his parents moved closer to his bedside. His eyes fluttered open, dazed and confused, but when he saw his parents smiling down at him, he relaxed. "What happened?" he mumbled groggily, reaching up to touch his ear instinctively. "You're going to be okay," his father said, brushing a strand of hair off his forehead. "They got it out." The boy blinked, trying to piece together what had happened. "The bug? It's gone?" "Yes," his mother assured him, kissing his cheek. "It's all over now." Though he didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation, the boy seemed satisfied with their answer. He drifted back to sleep, his body exhausted from the ordeal. Meanwhile, the specialist took a moment to reflect on what had just transpired. Cases like this were incredibly rare, bordering on unbelievable. Yet here they were, a testament to the unpredictable nature of life. He couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of the human body and the ingenuity of modern medicine. Turning back to the container holding the larva, he studied it closely. It was a strange-looking creature, its segmented body glistening faintly under the light. Though it had caused so much trouble, it was fascinating in its own way, a reminder of how interconnected humans were with the natural world. For the boy's family, however, fascination was the last thing on their minds. All they cared about was that their son was safe and that they never wanted to go through anything like this again. "Would you like me to continue expanding the remaining parts in the same style?" The specialist placed the container holding the larva on the counter and turned to the boy's parents. His expression was calm, but serious, the kind that made people sit up straighter and pay attention. He knew this moment would be difficult for them. Understanding exactly what had happened wasn't just about solving a medical mystery. It was about processing how something so bizarre could invade their child's body without anyone noticing. "Let me explain what we're dealing with here," he began, his voice steady and reassuring. "What we removed from your son's ear is a beetle larva, a young insect in its developmental stage. These larvae are often found in soil, decaying wood, or near bodies of water like ponds. They're not typically harmful to humans unless they find themselves in an unusual place like an ear canal." The boy's mother covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with disbelief. How did it even get there?" she stammered, her voice trembling. The specialist nodded sympathetically. "It's likely your son mistook it for a pebble or bead when he picked it up near the pond. Beetle larvae can sometimes blend in with their surroundings because of their color and texture. Once inside the ear, the warm, moist environment probably attracted it further, and over time it settled in deeper." Her husband clenched his fists tightly, clearly struggling to process the information. "But couldn't he have felt it? Moving around or heard something?" The specialist sighed softly. "That's the remarkable and unsettling part. Human ears are designed to block out minor sensations, especially if the object isn't causing immediate pain or irritation. In this case, the larva likely stayed relatively still at first, feeding off tiny particles of skin or earwax. As it grew larger, though, it started pressing against sensitive areas, which explains why your son began experiencing pain." The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. The idea of a living creature surviving unnoticed inside someone's ear for 2 weeks was almost too much to comprehend. It sounded like something out of a horror movie, Not real life. The specialist continued, his tone gentle but firm. This is an extremely rare occurrence. Most cases involving insects in ears happen quickly, like bugs flying in accidentally, and are resolved within hours. What makes this situation unique is the length of time the larva remained undetected. Your son's body adapted to its presence, masking the signs until the discomfort became unbearable. The boy's father shook his head slowly, his face pale. I can't believe this actually happened. How does something like this even exist? It's nature, the specialist replied simply. Insects are incredibly resilient creatures, and some species have adapted to survive in hostile environments. While finding one in a human ear is rare, it's a reminder of how interconnected our world is, and how important it is to stay vigilant. He paused, giving the family a moment to absorb everything. Then, changing the subject slightly, he added, "Now that the larva has been removed, we'll monitor your son closely for any signs of infection. I've prescribed antibiotics as a precaution, but I don't anticipate any major complications. His eardrum appears intact and there's no visible damage to the surrounding tissues." The boy's mother wiped away her tears, managing a weak smile. "Thank you," she whispered hoarsely. "We were so scared." "You handled it well," the specialist assured her. "And your son was brave throughout the entire process. That matters more than anything." As the conversation wound down, the specialist decided to take a closer look at the larva itself. Using a magnifying glass, he examined the tiny creature in detail. Its segmented body shimmered faintly under the light, and its legs twitched occasionally, though it seemed weakened by its ordeal. Despite its role in the boy's suffering, the specialist couldn't help but admire its resilience. Nature had equipped it to survive in unimaginable conditions, even inside a human ear. Curious, he snapped a few photos of the larva for documentation purposes. Cases like this were so rare that they often ended up in medical journals or presentations, serving as reminders of the unexpected challenges doctors might face. He made a mental note to share the findings with colleagues later, emphasizing the importance of thorough examinations in similar situations. Back in the examination room, the boy stirred again, stirring awake from the sedation. His parents rushed to his side, brushing his hair back and speaking softly to reassure him. "Hey, buddy," his father said gently. "You're okay now. Everything's fine." The boy blinked groggily, his gaze drifting toward the specialist. "Is it really gone?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. "Yes, it's gone," the specialist confirmed, smiling warmly. "You don't have to worry anymore." Relief washed over the boy's face, and he relaxed into his mother's embrace. For him, the ordeal was already fading into the background. He was just glad the pain was gone. But for his parents, the memory of those tense hours would linger for a long time. Later that evening, as the family drove home, the boy drifted off to sleep in the back seat, exhausted from the day's events. His parents sat quietly in the front, holding hands and reflecting on everything that had happened. "I never want to go through that again," the boy's mother murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "Me neither," her husband agreed. "But at least he's safe now. That's all that matters." They both glanced at their sleeping son in the rearview mirror, grateful for the happy ending to such a strange and frightening chapter in their lives. "Would you like me to continue expanding the remaining parts in the same style?" The specialist's clinic was quiet now, the tension of the day slowly easing as the family prepared to leave. But before they could go, there were still a few final steps to ensure the boy's recovery would be smooth and complication-free. The specialist knew that removing the larva was only part of the battle. The real challenge lay in making sure the boy's ear healed properly, and that no hidden issues lingered. "All right," the specialist said, turning back to the parents with a reassuring smile. "Now that we've taken care of the immediate problem, let's talk about what comes next. Your son's ear will need some time to recover, but with proper care he should be back to normal soon." The boy's mother nodded eagerly, leaning forward to catch every word. Her hands were clasped tightly together, a sign of her lingering anxiety despite the relief washing over her. "What do we need to do?" she asked, her voice tinged with urgency. The specialist began explaining the aftercare instructions in simple terms, ensuring they understood each step. First, I've prescribed a course of antibiotics to prevent any chance of infection. It's unlikely, given the condition of his ear, but it's always better to err on the side of caution. Make sure he takes the full dose, even if he seems fine before finishing it. He paused, watching as the boy's father scribbled notes on a piece of paper. Second, keep an eye out for any unusual symptoms, things like fever, swelling, or discharge from the ear. If you notice anything like that, bring him back immediately. Otherwise, just let him rest and avoid touching or poking his ear while it heals. The boy's mother sighed softly, nodding again. We'll make sure he follows everything, she promised. I don't think he'll be sticking anything in his ears anytime soon. Her comment drew a faint chuckle from the specialist, who appreciated her attempt to lighten the mood. That's good to hear, he replied with a small smile. Kids are naturally curious, but sometimes curiosity can lead to trouble. This experience might help him remember to be more careful in the future. With the instructions clear, the specialist turned his attention back to the boy, who was sitting upright now, looking much more alert than before. His earlier grogginess had faded, replaced by a mix of curiosity and apprehension. How's your ear feeling? The specialist asked kindly, crouching down to meet the boy at eye level. The boy hesitated, tilting his head slightly as if testing for pain. It doesn't hurt anymore, he admitted, his voice quieter than usual. That's great news, the specialist said warmly. You're going to feel even better once your body has a little time to heal. Just take it easy for the next few days, okay? The boy nodded solemnly, though his expression suggested he was still processing everything that had happened. To him, the idea of a bug living inside his ear seemed almost unreal, like something out of one of the science fiction books he loved to read. Yet here he was, living proof that life could surprise you in ways you never imagined. Before leaving the clinic, the specialist handed the parents a pamphlet with additional information about ear health and safety tips for children. He also encouraged them to schedule a follow-up appointment in 2 weeks to ensure the boy's ear was healing, as expected. As they gathered their things and thanked the specialist one last time, the boy tugged gently on his mother's sleeve. Can I see it? He asked hesitantly, his eyes darting toward the container holding the larva. His mother froze, unsure how to respond. She glanced at the specialist, silently asking if this was a good idea. The specialist considered the request for a moment. One hand showing the boy the larva might satisfy his curiosity and help him understand what had happened. On the other hand, it could also frighten him further. After weighing the pros and cons, he decided to proceed cautiously. Sure, he said, picking up the container and holding it at a safe distance. But remember, this is the thing that was causing all the trouble. It's not dangerous anymore. It's just a tiny creature that got lost. The boy leaned closer, his wide eyes fixed on the wriggling form inside the container. For a brief moment, he looked fascinated rather than scared. Wow, he whispered, his voice filled with awe. It's so small, but it felt so big. His father chuckled softly, ruffling his hair. That's because it was in a place where it didn't belong, he explained gently. Next time, maybe stick to playing with toys instead of bugs, all right? The boy grinned sheepishly, nodding quickly. Yeah. I won't forget this lesson anytime soon. Satisfied that the boy wasn't traumatized by the sight, the specialist carefully sealed the container and set it aside. All right, champ, he said, standing up straight. You're free to go home now. Just remember to take it easy and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks. The family thanked him once more before heading out, the weight of the day finally beginning to lift. As they walked through the parking lot, the boy's energy returned bit by bit, his natural curiosity shining through once again. Do you think it'll grow into a beetle now? He asked suddenly, looking up at his parents. His father raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by the question. Probably not, he replied after a moment. The doctor will probably study it to figure out how it ended up in your ear in the first place. The boy frowned thoughtfully, clearly imagining the possibilities. Maybe it wanted to explore, just like me. he mused aloud. His mother laughed softly, shaking her head. Well, let's hope neither of you decides to explore anywhere quite so risky again, she teased, squeezing his hand affectionately. By the time they arrived home, the boy was already talking animatedly about his adventure, recounting every detail to anyone who would listen. While his parents were relieved that he seemed unfazed by the experience, they couldn't help but marvel at his resilience. Children, they realized, had an incredible ability to bounce back from even the strangest situations. Later that night, as the boy drifted off to sleep in his own bed, his parents sat together in the living room, reflecting on the day's events. I still can't believe it happened, the boy's mother murmured, shaking her head in disbelief. Neither can I, her husband agreed. But at least we know now how important it is to teach him and ourselves to pay closer attention to these things. They both fell silent, their thoughts drifting to the countless what-ifs that had crossed their minds throughout the ordeal. What if the larva had caused permanent damage? What if they hadn't taken him to the doctor when they did? These questions lingered, serving as stark reminders of how fragile life could be. Yet amidst the uncertainty, one thing was clear. Their son was safe, healthy, and eager to move on. And for now, that was enough. Would you like me to continue expanding the remaining parts in the same style? The days that followed were a blur of quiet recovery and deep reflection for the family. The boy, now back to his usual energetic self, seemed almost unfazed by the bizarre ordeal he'd endured. To him, it was already becoming a story, a strange but fascinating chapter in his young life. For his parents, however, the experience lingered like an echo, reminding them of how quickly ordinary moments could turn extraordinary, and sometimes frightening. On the first night after returning home, the boy slept soundly, his breathing steady and calm. His parents checked on him repeatedly, unable to shake the image of what had been living inside his ear just hours earlier. Each time they peeked into his room, they found him curled up under his blanket, fast asleep and blissfully unaware of their lingering worries. He's fine, the boy's father whispered to his wife as they stood in the doorway watching their son sleep. There's no point worrying anymore. I know, she replied softly, though her voice betrayed the unease still weighing on her mind. It's just, I can't stop thinking about how close we came to something worse. Her husband nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Me too, but we got through it. That's what matters. As the days passed, life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such an unusual event. The boy's curiosity remained undiminished, though his parents made sure to reinforce some important lessons about safety. Sitting him down one afternoon, they decided it was time for a serious conversation. Remember when you put that thing in your ear? His mother began gently, her tone firm, but kind. The boy nodded, his cheeks flushing slightly with embarrassment. Yeah. Well, we need to talk about why that wasn't safe, she continued. Your ears are very delicate, and putting things in them, even if they seem harmless, can cause big problems. Do you understand? He looked down at his hands, fidgeting nervously. I didn't mean to hurt myself, he mumbled. I just thought it would come out easy. We know, his father chimed in, leaning forward to catch his son's gaze. But sometimes even small mistakes can lead to big consequences. From now on, if you find something interesting or want to explore, come to us first. We'll help. You figure out if it's safe. The boy nodded again, this time more earnestly. Okay, I promise I won't stick anything in my ears ever again. His parents exchanged a relieved glance, knowing that while promises were a good start, consistency would be key. They resolved to keep a closer eye on him during playtime, especially when he ventured outdoors near ponds, fields, or other areas where bugs might lurk. Meanwhile, news of the boy's unusual experience spread quickly through their tight-knit community. Word traveled fast in small towns, and soon neighbors, teachers, and friends were asking questions. Some reactions were lighthearted, jokes about nature's surprises, and playful warnings to check ears regularly, but others were more serious. Parents began sharing stories of their own children's close calls, sparking conversations about the importance of teaching kids about safety and awareness. At school, the boy became something of a local celebrity. During recess, his classmates gathered around him, eager to hear every detail of his adventure. "So there was really a bug in your ear?" one of his friends asked, wide-eyed with amazement. "Not exactly a bug," the boy corrected, feeling a surge of pride at being able to explain it properly. "It was a larva, a baby beetle. It lived in my ear for 2 weeks." "Wow," another friend exclaimed. "Did it tickle?" "Nope," the boy replied, shaking his head dramatically. "It hurt. A lot. But the doctor got it out, and now I'm okay." His teacher overheard the chatter and decided to use the opportunity to teach the class a valuable lesson. Gathering everyone together, she launched into a discussion about body safety and the dangers of inserting objects into ears, noses, or mouths. "Sometimes things that seem fun or harmless can actually be dangerous," she explained, holding up a diagram of the human ear. "Our bodies are amazing, but they're also delicate. We need to take care of them so they can stay healthy and strong." The boy listened intently, nodding along as his teacher spoke. Though he'd already learned this lesson the hard way, hearing it reinforced in front of his peers helped solidify it in his mind. By the end of the day, he felt like an expert on ear safety, and maybe even a little proud of having survived such a unique experience. Back at home, the boy's parents noticed a shift in his behavior. He was more cautious now, pausing to think before picking up random objects or exploring unfamiliar places. One evening, while playing outside, he called his father over to show him something he'd found, a shiny pebble nestled in the grass. "Look what I found," he said excitedly, holding it out for inspection. "That's cool," his father replied, crouching down beside him. "What do you think we should do with it?" Instead of immediately suggesting he keep it or play with it, the boy hesitated, glancing toward the house. "Maybe we could put it somewhere safe, like on the shelf." His father smiled, ruffling his hair affectionately. "That sounds like a great idea. Let's go wash it off first just to be sure." Moments like these reassured the boy's parents that he was learning from the experience. While they knew he wouldn't always make perfect decisions, after all, he was still a child, they were grateful to see him growing more mindful of his actions. In the weeks that followed, the family attended the follow-up appointment with the specialist, who confirmed that the boy's ear was healing beautifully. There were no signs of infection or damage, and the discomfort he'd felt was completely gone. "You're doing great," the specialist said, smiling warmly as he examined the boy's ear one last time. "Just keep taking care of yourself, and you'll be back to full strength in no time." Relieved and grateful, the family left the clinic feeling lighter than they had in weeks. As they drove home, the boy stared out the window, lost in thought. "What are you thinking about?" his mother asked, noticing his quiet demeanor. "I was wondering." He began hesitantly, turning to face her. "Do you think the larva missed me?" She laughed softly, reaching over to pat his hand. "Probably not," she teased. "But I'm sure it's happier wherever it is now." The boy grinned, satisfied with her answer. For him, the ordeal was truly behind him now, a strange but memorable part of his childhood that he'd carry with him forever. Would you like me to continue expanding the final part, Part 8, in the same style? As weeks turned into months, the boy's extraordinary experience became a story that everyone in the town knew, or at least thought they knew. People whispered about it at grocery stores, shared it during coffee breaks, and even brought it up at school meetings. For the boy's family, life had returned to normal, but the memory of those tense days lingered, not as a burden, but as a reminder of how unpredictable life could be. For the boy himself, the ordeal faded into the background of his childhood adventures. He was still the same curious, energetic kid who loved exploring the outdoors, but now he carried a little extra caution with him. Whether it was inspecting a shiny rock or poking around near the pond, he always paused to think twice, and more often than not, he ran to his parents to double-check if something seemed risky. His parents, on the other hand, found themselves reflecting deeply on the incident. It wasn't just about what had happened, it was about how close they'd come to something far worse. They realized that while they couldn't shield their son from every danger, they could teach him to navigate the world more safely. Conversations about health and safety became a regular part of their daily routine, woven naturally into their interactions. Remember, if you're not sure about something, ask first, his father reminded him one day as they walked through the park. I know, Dad, the boy replied, rolling his eyes playfully. You tell me that all the time. And we'll keep telling you until it sticks, his mother added with a wink, earning a groan from her son. Despite the teasing, the lessons were taking root. The boy began noticing things he hadn't before, like how tiny objects could easily get stuck in awkward places, or how bugs, though fascinating, weren't always harmless. His curiosity remained intact, but it was tempered by a newfound awareness. At school, the story of the larva in his ear became a topic of discussion among teachers and parents alike. During parent-teacher meetings, educators emphasized the importance of teaching children about body safety in creative ways. One teacher even organized a science lesson around insects and ecosystems, using the boy's experience, with permission, as an example of why humans needed to respect nature's boundaries. Nature is amazing, the teacher explained to the class, holding up a jar containing a harmless beetle. But it's also powerful, and sometimes it doesn't mix well with us. That's why we have to be careful. The boy sat proudly in the front row, soaking in the attention. While some kids might have been embarrassed by being the center of such a unique story, he wore it like a badge of honor. After all, how many 10-year-olds could say they'd survived a bug living inside their ear? Over time, the tale took on a life of its own. Neighbors joked about checking their ears after spending time outdoors, and parents used it as a cautionary anecdote when talking to their own children. Even the local newspaper picked up the story, writing a short article titled, A Bug's Unlikely Home: How Curiosity Led to an Unforgettable Discovery. The piece highlighted not only the medical rarity of the case, but also the importance of fostering open communication between kids and adults. Dr. Carter, the pediatrician who had first examined the boy, kept a copy of the article pinned to her office bulletin board. To her, it served as a reminder of how medicine was as much about listening and observation as it was about diagnosis and treatment. She often shared the story with new patients' families, emphasizing the value of seeking help early, even for seemingly minor complaints. This job teaches you to expect the unexpected, she told a colleague one afternoon, smiling as she recalled the case. But every once in a while, something comes along that reminds you just how incredible and unpredictable life can be. For the boy's parents, the experience strengthened their bond as a family. They learned to approach challenges together, supporting each other through moments of fear and uncertainty. It also deepened their appreciation for the resilience of children. Despite everything their son had gone through, he emerged unscathed, not just physically but emotionally too. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, the boy suddenly piped up, "Do you think I'll remember this when I'm older?" His parents exchanged amused glances before his father answered, "Oh, I think you will. It's not every day someone finds out they've been hosting a bug in their ear." The boy grinned, clearly pleased with the idea of having such a unique story to share later in life. "Maybe I'll write a book about it someday," he declared confidently. "That's a great idea," his mother said, laughing softly. "You'll call it The Adventures of Ear Explorer." The entire table erupted in laughter, the sound filling the room with warmth. In that moment, it was clear that the experience, though strange and frightening at times, had ultimately brought them closer together. As the months passed, the boy continued to grow, learning new lessons and facing new challenges. But whenever he thought back to the day he discovered the larva in his ear, he felt a mix of pride and gratitude. Pride because he'd handled the situation bravely, and gratitude because he knew how lucky he was to have caring parents and skilled doctors who helped him through it. For the rest of the town, the story became a testament to the power of community, curiosity, and resilience. It sparked conversations about safety, encouraged people to pay closer attention to their surroundings, and reminded everyone that life had a way of surprising us when we least expected it. And so, the boy's adventure came full circle. not just as a bizarre medical case, but as a lesson that touched the lives of everyone involved. From the worried parents to the dedicated doctors, from curious classmates to thoughtful neighbors, the ripple effects of that single discovery reached far beyond the confines of a small town. In the end, it wasn't just about the larva or the ear, it was about how an unexpected twist in life could bring people together, teach valuable lessons, and leave a lasting impact on hearts and minds. This concludes the expanded version of Let Me Know if you'd like any adjustments or additional details.